Welcome to another Ocean Ideas Talk, brought to you by ocean lovers.
For this session, the urchin invasion turning a climate crisis into a culinary cure, I'm delighted to introduce actor and environmental educator Tessa de Josselin as our host. Tessa is combining her love for the creative industry with environmental advocacy. She hosts the podcast The Nature Between Us and recently completed her master's thesis on seaweed and climate mitigation. Please join me in welcoming Tessa to the stage to introduce our speakers.
Hello. We're on. Thank you, Robin. Hi, everyone. I'd also like to start by acknowledging that we are on unceded Aboriginal land and pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any First Nations people that might be joining us here today. So we are here to talk about the urchin invasion, a climate crisis that could be turned into a culinary cure. We've only got about 20 minutes, so I'm going to get our panellists up here straight away. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Dr. Sahira, who is the director and co-founder of the Great Southern Reef Foundation. Sahira is a marine ecologist and storyteller, navigating the space between science and society to drive nature-positive solutions and marine protection. Welcome, Sahira. Next, we have Dr. Emily McLaren, who is from the University of Sydney. Emily is an interdisciplinary researcher integrating taxonomy, ecology, and biology to investigate climate change impacts, in particular focusing on echinoderms, I hope I said that correctly, including sea urchins. Welcome, Dr. Emily. And last but very much not least, we've got Chef Johnson from Melbourne urchin restaurant, The Roe, Australia. Johnson is a chef passionate about developing sea urchin recipes, transforming them from pest to plate. He advocates for sustainable harvesting to restore marine ecosystems while creating unique culinary experiences. Welcome, Chef Johnson. So, I might throw to the audience just for a show of hands. Who here is aware of what the Great Southern Reef is? Okay, we've got about 50, 60%. For those of you who might be thinking, what the heck is that? I'd like to throw to Sahira to start with. What is the Great Southern Reef? Where is it? And why is it such an important ecosystem for us to want to protect?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say 50% of the crowd knowing already is a huge number compared to normal. So we do have two great reefs in Australia, and the Great Southern Reef is really one of Australia's best assets. It's an 8,000 kilometre long network of kelp forests that runs all the way from Kalbarri in WA, so about midway up the coast, all across the south coast, encapsulating Tassie, all the way up the east coast into northern New South Wales. So basically, if you drew a horizontal line halfway across Australia, all of that coast below it is the Great Southern Reef. And these kelp forests are home to truly otherworldly creatures like sea dragons and wobbegongs, and full of bright colours and incredible plants and animals. And a lot of these are endemic, which means that they are found nowhere else on this planet. And these kelp forests really are the backbone of our southern seas, so they underpin some really key industries like fisheries and tourism, and they contribute billions to the economy every year. But the really incredible thing about the Great Southern Reef is that it goes beyond that. And it is so deeply embedded into the fabric that is our Aussie culture. So whether that's fishing or diving or stories that are passed on from generation to generation, the Great Southern Reef is playing a huge role in our day-to-day lives, in our culture, and that's what makes it truly unique to all Australians.
Amazing. A lot of value there. But unfortunately, it's also under threat from several factors, one of which comes in the form of a small spiky ball. Emily, can you speak to what the urchins are doing to our beautiful Great Southern Reef and explain to the audience what a sea urchin barren is?
So sea urchins they're herbivores, so they're kind of like if you think of an equivalent on land, they're, the things that eat plants. And sea urchins are a natural part of kelp forests, just in the same way that, herbivores are natural things that we get on land. But due to different factors, things like climate change or removal of predators, sometimes sea urchins their numbers can kind of get out of control. And what happens there is they munch up a lot of the kelp, and they keep reproducing, and what we're left with is what we see as a sea urchin barren, which is kind of doesn't really have that nice beautiful kelp, but instead we've got little things like turfing algae, and a lot of coralline algae. So if you think of like the kind of pink stuff that you see on top of rocks, so lots of that. And one of the main things that is quite challenging about that is it's quite hard to go from that state back to a kelp forest state.
Sure. And is it all species of urchin that is eating the kelp, or is there one particular species of urchin that's doing the most damage?
No, yeah. So there's one particular species, which is the long-spine sea urchin, or Centrostephanus rogersi. And that's the kind of big black spiky thing that you see out in the water. Even in Sydney, for example, we actually have over 40 species of sea urchin, and they can range from little tiny things about that big that live in seagrass meadows and in mud to there's equivalent sizes like big red sea urchins that we get out here, which are called the red sea urchin or Heliosidaris tuberculata. And one thing that's really interesting about those is they're actually moving towards numbers that are, looking bad, so that we're actually losing those, and they're to the point that we actually have closed fisheries of those along a lot of the New South Wales coast as well. So
yeah, interesting.
Lots of sea urchins.
Lots of sea urchins, but one main culprit. So just to think about what could be driving this, obviously ocean conditions have natural variabilities. They're constantly changing naturally, but climate change is playing a very big role in this. Sahira and Emily, could you guys speak to what it is about climate change that is driving this surge in urchin populations?
I can start. So with climate change on the east coast of Australia, we have a big poleward flowing current that goes along the coast, which is the East Australian current, which we all know from Finding Nemo. And with climate change, that current is getting faster and it's getting hotter. And so sea urchins, like a lot of other invertebrate critters, they have kind of two phases to their life. The first part of their life looks nothing like what you see in, on the floor of the seabed. They're these little tiny larvae that you can't see with your eyes. You need a microscope to see them. And they are able to travel in the East Australian current, and as that has gotten hotter and faster, they've been able to make it into places they've never been before. And it's really important to kind of note that they are, at least they're native in New South Wales, but it's really climate change that is driving this change and allowing them to get into new habitats. And it's really important that we remember that it's climate change that's doing that. And it's things like this that kind of help us engage with that. And yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really great point, and differentiating that difference between natural variability. Our oceans do change naturally anyway, and trying to understand the role that climate change is playing in that, in this whole scenario, is sometimes really difficult for us to get across to audiences. So I do have this nice little analogy that I like to use. And if you imagine you had a dice, and every time you rolled that dice and you got a different number, this is representing natural variability and natural ocean changes that these ecosystems undergo. Climate change is like adding one extra dot to every side of that dice. So now, even though every roll is only going up by one, your lowest number doubles, your average increases by a third, and your highest value increases by 15%. So even though it's just that one extra dot, these extras, they manifest into something that's really significant. And in the case of the urchins, it's these extras that has really turned this, these naturally occurring species in a natural environment, is caused this imbalance and caused the problem in the first place.
I love that analogy. I've heard you say it once before, and I just think it's such a great way of explaining a really complex thing, such as climate change and how it's impacting our ecosystems. Okay, so we know that we're losing our kelp forests because of these urchins, but what can we do to help?
So a super simple answer, we can eat them. So what we see is that these urchins are just getting to such significant numbers that they're ruining their ecosystems. But when in some places, before it's gotten too catastrophic, if we can just remove the urchins from these environments, we can see these ecosystems bounce back really well. So obviously, to remove urchins, we need to create a reason for removing them, and eating them is a huge one. If we can drive the local demand for urchin consumption, then we can drive the demand to get these urchins out of the water, and then almost as a byproduct, we end up restoring the ecosystems in the process.
It's a truly win-win situation. I'd love to throw to the audience again, just for a show of hands, who here has eaten a sea urchin? Okay, wow, you guys are just tip-top. For like the maybe 5 or 10 people who are in the room who haven't eaten a sea urchin, Chef Johnson, sorry to keep you quiet for so long. Can you explain to everyone, what does a sea urchin taste like, and what is one of your favourite ways to prepare the sea urchin?
Thank you, Tessa. So it gave me a surprise. Almost everyone's here eats sea urchins before. So textures-wise, sea urchins, it's almost like an ocean batter. Savory, buttery texture, and it gives you a very strong, creamy flavor, just bursting out of your, just keep bursting, and it stays long after you finish the urchin. And in my opinion, I think the best way to consume it, it's just eat it raw, but in different culture around the world, we've seen them in pasta, we've seen them in sushi, and that's just different ways of eating the sea urchins.
And what are some of the health benefits that come from eating? I mean, we know it tastes good, but I imagine it's also quite good for us as well.
Yeah, that's right. You would imagine such a small urchin would bring out a pack full of nutrients. So they are antioxidant. They are full of multivitamins A, B, and D. And also for men, they are aphrodisiac.
I love that. Well, I might throw to our last question before we wrap up and hear from you guys. There's obviously a really big need for industry and government to step in here, as we know that prevention is better than cure when it comes to these urchins taking over. In Tasmania, the government implemented some funding to support an initiative to do mass harvesting, and it was a really big success. Can you speak to whether or not that will be happening elsewhere in Australia, and what you think about those kind of initiatives?
Yeah, well, it really does need to happen along more parts of our coast where this is a problem. The example of Tassie was a really cool one because it targeted that, it promoted that demand for harvesting of the urchins. So harvesting is very labour intensive. It's literally a diver down there picking them up one by one. And that costs money and resources. And without the consumption demand there, it's really hard to get those industries going. So what the Tassie government did is they brought in some subsidies as a way to encourage that industry, and it worked really well. We saw some really great results along different sections of the Tassie coast where the kelp forest started coming back. But that needs to be expanded spatially, and it needs to keep going, basically. It'd be a real shame to lose the traction that these first subsidies have gained.
I mean, it's a pretty strong call to action here then, really. It's eat a long-spined sea urchin. It's a win-win, you know. It creates new jobs and industries. It helps communities and individuals engage with the climate crisis and with conservation efforts. And the byproduct, as you said earlier, is that it helps restore our kelp forests, which is so integral to the Great Southern Reef and so many other species that exist down there. I want to just touch briefly on each of you, and you can pass on some information for if people want to learn more about what you're working on, where can they go? I'll start with you, Sahira.
So, funnily enough, the Great Southern Reef Foundation have just made a film about this exact issue. It's called White Rock. It's currently touring with the Urchin Film Festival, so showing at 50 screenings across the country. But over the next month or two, we're going to start running our own community screenings, particularly here along the East Coast in areas where this is a problem. So the premiere is April 26th in Bendalong, a nice long weekend if anyone's looking for a getaway, and then keep your eyes peeled for the rest of the community screenings that will happen over the next 2 months.
Amazing. Emily, how can we follow along your urchin research?
You can read some of my papers, but also feel free to reach out to us. Myself, and then there are a few other kind of echinoderm workers around Sydney. But yeah, always feel free if you have questions to kind of reach out to us. Our emails are usually on websites and or the University of Sydney website, and we're generally very receptive to hearing from the public and what's going on. We want to know what questions you have and how we can help you.
Amazing. And Chef Johnson, where can we eat urchins and where can we buy them?
Well, for myself, when you visit Melbourne, make a trip down to Glen Waverley and visit the Row. So we are a one-stop solutions. We also showcase sea urchin gallery on these issues. So you can eat an urchin while you have more information about sea urchins.
Amazing. All right, well, we're going to throw to the audience. I think we've got about 5 minutes left. I think there's a roaming mic going around. The woman in the beautiful teal and whale shirt, thank you.
G'day. I'm curious in terms of industry, what the levels of population they're talking about and what's the kind of reproductive turnaround in terms of generating and sustainability of that cycle. I mean, I'm really fascinated that you think it can sustain an industry, so just curious.
Yeah, I can speak on the reproduction of these critters. The long-spine sea urchin, we reckon if you see a big one out there, it's probably about 10 years old. And they are reproductive once a year. So they'll produce their gonads, which are actually the part that get eaten, once a year in the winter time, or at least around here it's in the winter time. And then they spawn and they create the little larvae that I spoke about that then settle out. So you're getting that process happening every year, and sea urchins spawn every year as well. So they're reproducing.
And they're highly successful reproducers as well. When they spawn that once a year, they are releasing, I'm not going to try and estimate a number, but an incredible heaps. Perfect, heaps. They're releasing heaps. So it is definitely potential for a sustainable industry. Is the short answer to that. It absolutely can sustain a thriving industry that is still not only sustainable, but it's actually nature positive because it does promote that restoration as well.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. Great question. Who else had their hand up?
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful.
I have more of a question on the health benefits. So people get very obsessed with fish because of the omega-3. Does sea urchin also have high concentration of omega-3?
I'm not a nutrition scientist, but no, I don't think so. But it's a lot of different. It is also anti-inflammation, so it's in some way high concentration of zinc. So it's a good pack of superfood.
Who else had? Oh yeah, at the back.
I was just wondering, I know we're utilising algae for feeds for cows to minimise methane, and I'm wondering, is all we have to do is eat them? Is there another study that's happening that we can put it into fertiliser for plants, or is there another way that we can utilise the organism?
Yeah, great. That was one of our questions that we didn't get time for, speaking about the byproducts, so love to hear about that.
Yeah, so in our processing factories in Tassie, we So only 10% of the sea urchins can be eaten, so 90% goes out to waste. And we have organizations here in New South Wales that takes all this waste and turn them into fertilizer, and it's working out really well.
I think we have time for one more.
What incentives are there for the exploitation of this industry? Are there any government incentives to expand this industry?
Yeah, so Tassie is a good example of the subsidies trying to promote just the harvesting or that part of the process. It is a topical question, and about a year ago there was a whole Senate inquiry into this problem and into the solution and what this industry could look like. And there is actually a whole business plan put together, a very, very extensive document, a bunch of stakeholders involved, that basically that is the blueprint for how this could work. This has been taken to federal government. They held the Senate inquiry. They even went as far to say, yep, this is good. And then they went quiet. So it's a large motivator for us making this film. So a lot of the feedback we get from decision makers is, yep, we see the issue, we see a solution, we hear you, we agree, but without community support and without that pressure, we can't do anything about it yet. So that's the film. We want to increase that community knowledge, get people inspired, get people eating urchin, but get people talking and influencing their decision makers to push this on.
Emily, you mentioned there are two life stages, essentially, to the urchins. What are the urchins' natural predators?
Great question. Well, it depends on where you are in the Great Southern Reef. For example, if you're in Sydney, we've got things like the blue groper, the rock lobsters, and there's actually a really cool paper that came out with some research down in Wollongong last year that shows that Port Jackson sharks also eat them. So yeah, they've got quite a large suite of predators, but one of the, I think, primary issues, especially in Tasmania, is that a lot of those predators aren't there. So that's why we also have that issue down there.
I think that's all we have time for. I think you did such a great kind of wrap up just a moment ago. We got to eat more long-spined sea urchins. Mark your diaries. Make sure you catch the White Rock film. And if next time you're in Melbourne, go to the Row. And of course, any questions about urchins or echinoderms, which is a new term for me, you can find Dr. Emily's email online. But please put your hands together and give a very warm thank you to our amazing panellists. And I'll hand back to Robin and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the festival. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Ocean Ideas. Please make sure to share it with your networks and help us in our mission to turn ripples of action into waves of change for our blue planet.